Good evening, welcome in RNQ Easino classes. Block number 1 Introduction to Metaphysics. Unit number 1 Etymology, Definition and Scope. 1.1 Introduction. Knowledge is primary fact of human life experience. There are three elements that constitute three, knowledge, subject, object, and the act of knowledge. Cognition. The subject is one who knows. The object is the thing that is known, and cognition is the mental act which makes this object known to the subject. The subject is the object is, and the cognition, in other words, the subject is a being insofar as it is. The object is a being insofar as it is, and the cognition is a being insofar as it is. Their beings insofar as they are in being, which is the being of beings. No knowledge seem to be possible without being. Knowledge takes place in being, through being, and by being. Here being uh, mm, being appears as the core and ground of knowledge itself, and hence of all knowledge, whether empirical or philosophical. Hence metaphysics is implicit in all knowledge, in the structure of all judgments, all questions, and all desires, which imply the affirmative experience of smoothing, such as affirmative experience of something covers the whole range of actuality and possibility of what is and what remains to be, of the whole and part of one and many. 1.2 Etymology of metaphysics. Western, the traditional explanations is that the term metaphysics was coined by an Andronius of Rhodes c. 70 BC for those collected works as of Aristotle placed after physics, ta Fushika. The term thus had only a methodetic value. It was only a coincidence that this section placed after metaphysics treated of realities beyond the physical properties of beings. Hence, in the course of time, metaphysics ta meta ta Fushika came to mean that department of philosophy which deals with those features of beings that are hyperphysical, supersensible, and immaterial. This seemingly reasonable explanation through uncertainty accepted by most philosophers and historians appears to be a little far-fetched, for it would have been too much of a coincidence for the concept of metaphysics to be successfully adapted so as to contain the science of transcendent reality. Kant actually declared his suspicion, saying that the expression is too felicitous to be regarded as the result of chance. Hence, Riemann deserves the highest praise for pointing out the misinterpretations and explaining the real origin of metaphysics. According to Remer Eudemus, Aristotle's immediate disciple, the author of the History of Theology, and the first editor of the teacher's works, must have invented the Namata Metata Fushika when Idumes edited by the works the science which from a Platonic standpoint Aristotle called the first philosophy was attached to the other relevant treatises and was given this title Andronicus, followed Idumeus and preferred the same name because he too considered the original name first philosophy to be unsuitable for an educational purpose. Hence, Hammer concludes that we must reject the hypothesis of the accidental bibliographical origin of the term since it was a deliberate use for educational purposes. The word did not originate from somebody's beings at the place as to what to call a book, but rather is the more suitable designation of the first philosophy concept, presumably based on the orthodox tradition from Aristotle and his immediate followers. Indian, through the term metaphysics is of Western origin, there are terms in Indian philosophy that have equivalent meaning of the Western understanding of the same. Perhaps the oldest term used in the Vedic literature to communicate it is Brahmadya c. 9th century BC. Brahmodaya means a speculative discussion about Brahman in the Upanishad 800 to 600 BC. It came to be denoted by the words Atmavedya, science or knowledge of the self, Paravidya, supreme science of transcendental knowledge, and Brahmavidya, science or knowledge of metaphysical viewpoint. In the Gita, metaphysics is Aditya Mavidya, science of the self. The the Gita, by bringing together the science of the self and delicatic Veda, indicates the close connection between the Vaisesika Sutra, first country AD, mentions Siddha Darshana, prophetic vision of all existing things arising from merit. Prasastapa, the 6th century AD, understand it as the vision of the perfected and considered it as a kind of perception achieved by enhancing the power of the senses through certain techniques or by inference or by initiative. Knowledge present in all 1.3 definition of metaphysics. General metaphysics or fundamental ontology, the core and ground of all knowledge, and philosophy is the science of being as being. Metaphysics is the core and ground of human knowledge as it underlines penetrates, transforms, and unifies all other departments of knowledge. It underlines all other departments. Underlines all other departments since its principles are the detached and disinterested drive of the pure desire to know. The unfolding of pure desire to know takes place in the empirical, intellectual, and rational consequences of the self-affirming subject. All questions, all insights, all of formulations, all reflections, and the judgments proceed from the unfolding of that drive. Hence, metaphysics underlines logic, mathematics, and all other science. It 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 penetrates all other departments, for other departments are constituted of the same principles as that. The metaphysics, they are particular departments related to particular viewpoints, yet all departments spring from a common source and seek common compatibility and compatible and coherence, hence they are penetrated by metaphysics. It transforms all other departments. Metaphysics originates from the experience of something. It is free from the realizations of particular viewpoints. It distinguishes positions from counter positions. In the whole of knowledge, it is transforming principle that argues positions to fuller development. By receiving counter positions, it liberates discoveries from the cycles in which they were formulated. It unifies all other departments. All the other departments respond to particular ranges of questions, whereas metaphysics deals with the original and total questions. In this way, it moves to the total answer, transforming and putting together all other answers. Metaphysics then is the whole in knowledge, but not the whole of knowledge. A whole is whole with all its parts of dependent on them, but it is not identical with the parts. So the principles of metaphysics are prior to all other knowledge, and metaphysics places them together in the unity of a whole. Metaphysics as the core and ground of philosophy. Rene Descartes wrote to Picot with translated the Principia Philosophiae into French. Thus, the whole of philosophy is like a tree. The roots are metaphysics, the trunk is physics, and the branches that issue from the trunk are all the other sciences. In 1949, Martin Heidegger, in his lecture The Way Back into the ground of metaphysics, analyzed the thought of Descartes and came to the conclusion that the roots should have a ground for their support and nourishment, such as supporting and nourishing ground of metaphysics is being itself or nothing. Heidegger's brilliant analysis of the Cartesian metaphor ignores the vast difference between the roots of a tree and metaphysics, and between the roots of a tree and the ground in which the roots are. One can easily uproot a tree, separating it from the ground in which it is rooted. In the same way, one can't separate metaphysics from its so-called grounding itself. For all the roots metaphysics are identical and inseparable from its ground, since it is the latter which constitutes and distinguishes metaphysics from all other science. That is, bring itself is the formal object of metaphysics. Since metaphysics is not only the root of philosophy but its ground too. Metaphysics as science, human is never permanently satisfied with a superficial knowledge of things. One seeks to penetrate the veil of phenomena and grabs the noumena. This is due to humans' insatiable craving for knowledge. The increased knowledge in widely separated fields calls for unifications and systematization of the scattered items of knowledge. This is the origin of science according to its traditional meaning. Science is the sure and evident knowledge of things from their causes or systematic body of knowledge. In this sense, metaphysics seems to be supremely a science, for metaphysics arrives at the first efficient cause and the ultimate final cause of all things. From the viewpoint of causal explanations, metaphysics is the highest type of science. Its starting point that there is something is immediately known. From its immediately known starting point, the procedure of metaphysics is demonstrative with further reflections on the sensitivity sensitivity, rational experience of the being or something of sensible things which has both necessary and contingent characteristics. The reasoning of metaphysics bases itself only the necessary features. The being of any sensible thing is necessarily dependent on a prior efficient cause and the ultimate subsequent being. Hence, the reasoning of metaphysics is never based upon the accidental character of a sensible thing's being. Of course, metaphysics lacks the incomparable advantage enjoyed by the experimental sciences, which is verification through further sensible experiences. For instance, molecules were reasoned to form transference of orders and diffusion of gases. Their activity was verified in numerous experiments, and in recent years, very large molecules become visible through. हाँ The electron microscope. No such double check for its conclusions is possible in metaphysics. It has only the much harder way of checking its link in the demonstration through reflection. Accordingly, the agreement among astronomers or chemistry of physics is available. Will the chalo agreement among metaphysics at any historical period is knowledge. Therefore, metaphysical doctrines are neither theories in any modern acceptions of the term, nor are they. आप कहाँ से आओगे? आकाश भी जा conjectured hypotheses proposed for experimental verifications. In fact, they are demonstrated conclusions resting solely but immediately open the immediacy of their starting points and the cognition of reasoning process which qualify them to be scientific. Metaphysics as science which provides us with sure and evident knowledge of things from their causes also has its own object starting point, fundamental notions and principles, method and justifications. 1.4 Scope of metaphysics. The scope of metaphysics includes both its material and formal objects. Generally, matter in philosophy indicates the indeterminate but determinable element and form the determining element. These relative meanings of material and formal are also found in the theoretical sciences, especially when there are questions of the material object and the formal object of science. Material object is the definite realm of definite subject matter which a science deals with. For instance, inanimate matter, the stars, the earth, the language, the religion, law, etc. Formal object is this special aspect of the material object which is under considerations or study. A definite material object that is taken as the general matter to be studied will have many knowable aspects to be to be grasped fully in a single intellectual consideration to arrive at a well-founded total view. One will have to approach it in quasi-partial studies, that is through formal and analytic abstractions of the various aspects of the object, the material object. So considered in a definite aspect is this called the formal object. The material object of metaphysics includes all things which fall under the notions of being, such as the actual possible abstract or concrete, material or immaterial, finite or infinite. The formal object of metaphysics is the study of being as being, ends in quantum of ends. That is to say, metaphysics does not restrict itself to any particular being, to part of that being, but rather treats what is common to all beings, namely being, which is the ground of being. Since all beings are in being, being is not a particular or through thing. Through it embrace everything in itself. That which is not particular is still something or in some way. Hence, being is that which is in some way. Of course, our knowledge of being is an act of intuition, because of the indoubtable, inspirable, and immediate self-presence of being as being to my knowing, and is a predicative certainly which precedes the more formations of all explicit concepts and judgments. But this intuition is so imperfect that it does not yet say anything explicit about identity or participation, unity or plurality, etc. Because of these imperfections of our intuitions, we are forced to express the knowledge of being by means of a judgment. Now that the problem facing us is no longer that of being as being, but the problem of one, and maybe we'll have to investigate more accurately the nature of the predicate which is common to all, and ask ourselves how a predicate that does not express any plurality, fitnesses, imperfections, or indeterminations can be predicated of distinct, manifold, finite, imperfect, and determinable subject. These investigations will have to show how the most universal concept express everything at the same time, but simultaneously falls short because of its inadequacy. Taken in an absolute sense, because being pretends to everything the necessary, the real, and even the possible, the object known and the knowing subject, the concept and what is conceived, what is perceived, and what is purely proposed in imaginations or thought, and even the purely apparent. Therefore, being or something is absolutely all-embracing notion, is a general notion. By general is meant one which refers to many. Thus, it means here the being is predicated of which many beings distributively as multiplied in this many being is the absolutely general notion, because it is predicated not merely of a group of the beings but absolutely of all. It being is the absolutely general general notions. It can be defined for a definition. This is the concept defined under a more general thought content or genius higher class and indicates how it differs from the other concepts falling under the same genius by means of specific difference, but the notions of being does not fall under a higher more general concept, and therefore it is not a species. It is the first known in which everything else that is no thought or proposed is already present and presupposed. We can describe the notions of being only we recognize a certain structure in it. Like all our concept, it is not perfectly simple, but shows say certain dichotomy or barrier, and from being is that which has being, that which has a reference to being, and thought through which being is. If being is considered as a predicate, it is participle and emphasizes the participations in being. If it is used as a subject, it is a noun and stresses that which participates in being, the bearer of the or the subject of being. Now, a question arises is being known by abstractions. Abstractions is the operation by which the mind leaves aside abstracts from certain aspects of being. When the intellect abstracts it out of the whole complex of a being, it does so as it discovers that other beings also exhibit the same future. The more the content of a thought is abstract and leaves aside more particular contents, the more does its extensions become general, universal, and predicable of a large number. The opposite of abstractions is contractions, which is a processes by which the mind again adds the aspects which were left behind through abstractions to abstraction. The central characteristic of a being, since this central future, the more the content of a thought is abstract and leaves aside more particular contents, the more does its extensions become general, universal. The predicable of a larger number, the opposite of abstractions, is contractions, which is a process by which the mind again adds the aspects which were left behind through abstractions to the central characteristic of a being, since this central futures was central fu- central future as universal contractions will limit a concept from the more universal to the more particular, according an increase in comparison is accompanied by a decrease in extension. The abstraction is question is generalizing abstractions called total abstraction. It is a logical process in which one the same concrete whole. Example, John is considered under an increasingly more general aspect. For instance, as even a sentient being, living being, or corporeal being, it means that the being from which the concept is abstracted is not expressed as to one of its parts only, but as a whole. The totality is expressed but not totally. For this reason, the concept obtained through total abstractions can be predicated of more particular concepts and of the individual being. Example, John is a human or a human is a sentient being. If we suppose that the concept of a being is the most abstract in the sense of total abstractions, it would retain only that in which the many beings agree but leave aside that in which they differ. The differences would be expressed would be expressed in differentiating concept that stand independently alongside the notions of being. They would have to be added to it through contraction as positive enrichments of its content. If one wanted to arrive at the knowledge of the various beings, thus there would be a plurality of concepts. Nevertheless, these many thought contents would have to constitute a certain unity, no matter how imperfect. Hence, the notions of being and the differentiating concept would have to show a certain similarity with one another, but then this similarity itself, through a process of abstractions, could be isolated in a higher and a more general concept, and so on to infinity, without ever allowing us to reach the absolutely supreme and first notion. However, because of the unity of thinking as bias that the thinkable, there has to be a supreme and all embracing concept. Hence the most general concept can be obtained through abstractions, which leaves aside the differences. Therefore, this concept is of another nature than abstract concept. It has to also include the differentiating concepts, not merely potentially as in concepts that are obtained through total abstractions, but actually. Thus it is not possible to perform a perfect conceptual six separations of that in which beings are similar and that in which they differ otherwise. Since they are similar in this that they all are, that this similarity would have to lie in something that is beyond being, that is in non-being. But non-being can't be the foundations of a difference. For to differ is to be different, is to be a different way. Therefore the various beings differ in being itself. Accordingly, the differentiating concept which express the distinct modes of being of the various beings, such as subsistent, accidental, material, or spiritual, do not contain absolutely anything, but in that the case they are not additions to the notions to being. Consequently, they must lie within the content itself, the being as its immanent precisions. Thus it follows that the notions of being is not abstract in the proper sense of the term. Total abstractions, the notions of being extends to all beings, not only insofar as they are similar, but also insofar as they are dissimilar, and contains them in all aspects. For this reason, we call the notions of being transcendental. It is not only absolutely general concept transcending all other concept in extensions, but it is all the same time absolutely or embracing in as much as it somehow includes all the possible through thought content. Being transcendence every genius and all differences it contains in an eminent way, not only the highest abstract concept or genera, but also the differentiating concept, and therefore also the concept of spices. Everything in every concept is permitted with the no permitted with the notions of being. The term transcendental is opposed to categorical. A concept is categorical insofar as it falls under of the categories of predicaments, which are the fundamental concept. These are possibly positively distinct and thus opposed to one another, and do not agree in a higher general concept obtained through proper abstractions. It is to these categories that univocal concept of genius and species are reduced. A transcendental belongs first to of all to being. For this reason, we gave the name transcendental properties of being to the properties which flow from being as being. Such characteristics following from the identity of being with itself are the following: unity, truth, goodness, and beauty. In a somewhat broader sense, one may consider as transcendental properties those which pretend not to all beings but to beings having a higher mode of being, inasmuch as they do not include any imperfections in themselves. Transcendental in the content sense is opposed to empirical and applies to knowledge insofar as this knowledge is not concerned with objects but with the subjective a priori possibility of knowing objects. Transcendental should also be distinguished from transcendent, that is what transcends a given order of being and is independent of it. With reference to the cognitive object, transcendent means that which is above the cognitive immanence of the object with respect to the world of experience. It indicates which what lies beyond the world of experience, and with regard to the finite, it applies to what transcendence everything finite. Accordingly, the difference between the transcendental notions of being and abstract general concepts lie in this: being belongs to a being not only because of its similarity but also because of its dissimilarity. But the other beings bears the unity of the abstract general concept results from its abstractions. True, the notions of being actually in a contains and anything whatsoever that in any way has a reference to being and includes even the differences through which the various beings are in their own way, but as a concept or intermediary representations of our thinking, it is unable to give us adequate knowledge of the universal interconnections uniting everything. That is this imperfectness consists in the fact that although this idea contains the different modes of being, actually it contains them only implicitly and confusedly. Despite their being contained in these notions, they are not yet known explicitly and distinctly. For this reason, sometimes the term improper abstraction is used with respect to the notions of being, for it does not leave anything behind, but yet does not say everything explicitly. Thus there is need for other concepts. However, these concepts are not wholly and entirely different, but only more explicit renderings of what is already contained in the notions of being. Accordingly, the development of thought now consists in an immanent, explicit regarding of the notion of being. Thus, in an increasingly more adequate way, everything which through being is possible and all its realizations are brought to explicit knowledge in more determinate concepts. It is only in this way that the full richness of the notions of being reveals itself. The transactions from the confused notions to the explicit grasp of that which is depends on experience and the inside content in it. It is only through experience that we are placed in the presence of the various modes of being which we can't immediately deduce from the general notions of being itself. If being is the absolute general, Notion it belongs to everything, but if at the same time it is transcendental and thus contains and thus contains not merely potentially but actually the differentiating concept, how can it be predicated of the various beings and aspects of being in the same undifferentiated sense? In other words, the notions of being predicated of many in a sense that is neither absolutely the same nor entirely different. It has a unity of meaning because its sense reveals not an absolute but a relative similarity in the judgments we make about different beings, commonly called analogy. Analogy, the functions of the starting point of a metaphysics is to supply the basic data concerning the object of metaphysics, that is science of being as being, which is also analogous. The scope of metaphysics also includes its starting point. A science is always a logically ordered system, that is various parts of science are logically coherent. One part is justified by another scientific statements and deduced from another. However, this process can't go on to infinity. Ultimately one must arrive at premises that no longer are conclusions of a reasoning process within the limits of a given science, but have their truth established through their direct observations by the senses of their foundations in another science. Somehow every science is bound to have fundamental data that can serve as the starting point. In other words, the functions of the starting point is to supply the basic data concerning the object considered in the science. The physical science have their starting point in the concrete data of the senses obtained through observation or experimentations. The anthropological and cultural science have a broader starting point. It is constituted not only by sense experience but also man intellectual reflections upon himself. The mathematical sciences have their starting point in number line, surface or body. Starting point of a philosophical science is intellectual reflections on the general data of experience with respect to the being of a man and things that are man. The theological science have the data of revelations as the starting point. The questions about the starting point of metaphysics comes at the beginning of metaphysics itself. The starting point must be that which comes first before everything else, and from which we begin. We can already identify some significant views on the starting point of metaphysics. Among the metaphysics, some of them are the following: judgment as the starting point of metaphysics, advocated by Joseph Marshall. Every particular act of knowledge reveals a characteristic duality when it's expressed in a judgment, reference, and as essence. Knowledge always refers to something or someone and makes an essence about this something to or someone in either an affirmative or a negative way. To know something or someone always means to know it or one as being this way or that way, or not this way or that way. That is as judgment. Judgment is an act of the intellect of which we say something of an object by affirmations or a denial. Every particular judgment may be considered as a reply to the questions is the being in questions as it is asserted to be in the propositions. This questions is raised on the basis of a series of previously accepted suppositions. For instance, of the questions refers to the water, how of a person of or thing. It presupposes that they are if it is concerned with the actual occurrence of a particular event. It assumes a framework of successive events. If it aims at essential relationship example between certain numbers, it assumes that a world of numbers is possible. All such prepositions, when put into the form of questions, again allow more profound assumptions to reveal themselves. Ultimately, that they all point to one and the same most fundamental presuppositions, which excludes all other suppositions. Something, no matter what is, no matter no matter how. Judgments are of two kinds: direct judgment, immediate judgment, and indirect judgment, mediate judgment. Direct judgment is an act of the intellect in which we say something of an object empirically or transcendentally. Empirical direct judgment is an act of the intellect in which we say something of an object as presented to our senses. Example: this is a pen. Trans- Transcendental direct judgment is an act of the intellect in which we say something of something which is directly and immediately but implicitly present in all human experiences. Example: this is something. Indirect or mediate judgment is an act of the intellect in which we say something of an object derivatively. Example: all men are total all men are mortal. Everything judgment also has two aspects: concrete synthesis and affirmative synthesis. Objective synthesis. Concrete synthesis is a synthesis which joins a predicate of itself thus universal with an individual subject, and thus restricts the concept to this individual alone. This is a pen. Objective synthesis. Affirmative synthesis. Synthesis is the positions of correspondence between ourselves as possessing the complex totality of sensible and intelligible signs and the thing which represented or signified by them. Example: this is a pen. Objections: every judgment proposes at least an implicit awareness of the one who judges. Notions of itself is a priori to judgment itself, hence judgment can't be that which comes first before everything else and from which we begin. Quotients are the starting point of metaphysics, advocated by Martin Heidegger, Karl Rahner, Emmerich Korth, Otto Mach. Human quotient. Quotient is something final and irreducible. Everything attempt to quotient itself another quotient. This quotient is a metaphysical quotient. The metaphysical quotients is the reflexive articulations of the questions about being, which provides the ground of human existence itself. In this way, it is the transcendental questions merely which does not merely place something asked about the questions, but also the one questioning and his questions itself. It is the it is the starting point for metaphysics. One can ask oneself whether the questions concerning the starting point of metaphysics it itself has starting point which does not make any further logical and critical presuppositions. This turns the questions back upon itself and discloses that the questions in the beginning is unavoidable, and that at least questioning in itself is given as an unavoidable and non arbitrary beginning. For if the questions concerning the starting point was itself improper or questioning and meaninglessness of the questions concerning the starting point of metaphysics would be another questions objections. No one can raise the questions about something of which one does not know anything at all, as questions as the quest for the unknown from the known. From the known, every question presupposes some knowledge of the questions and at least some ignorance of it. Knowledge and ignorance imply affirmations and negations, denial, which are the characteristics of judgment. Hence, questions can be that which comes first before everything else, and from which we begin. Pure desire, known as the starting point of metaphysics, advocated by Bernard Longerian. Being is the objective of the pure desire to know. The desire to know is the dynamic orientation manifested in questions for intelligence, and the reflections is that the inquiring and critical spirit of man. It moves man to reflect, to seek the unconditioned. It prevents him from being content on untested theories and legends by raising questions for intelligence and reflections. It excludes complacent in inertia. For if the questions go unanswered, man can be complacent complicant in, and if the answers are right, man is not inert. The pure desire to know differs from other desires. This pure desire is to be known by giving free rein to intelligent and rational consequences, and not by comparing with other desires. It compels assent to the unconditioned. This pure desire has an objective. The objective of the pure desire to know is the content of knowing, and not merely the act of knowing. That is what is to be known, that which is to be known. The fact of asking or questioning results from the pure desire. Pure desire is pure or questioning and judging the starting point of metaphysics. Hence, be is all that is known and all that remains to be known. It is at the root of all that can be affirmed or conceived. It in underlines all judgment and formulations, all questioning, and the desire to questions. In this way, it is all inclusive objections. The objective of the pure desire to known of being is the motivating force of the desire. The pure desire already presupposes being which is known and remains to be known. Hence, the pure desire to know can't be which comes first before everything else, and from which we begin. Experience of something as the starting point of metaphysics. The starting point of metaphysics is the experience of something as it manifests itself in various forms. Experience means a special form of knowledge derived from the immediate receptions of the given or of the impressions in contrast to discursive thought. Mary concept authoritatively accepted opinions of irrefutable evidence. It is concerned with facts. It tends to experiment evidence. It can never reach apodicity evidence, for it does not know whether or not it's possible. Every is wholly unthinkable because of its absolute responsibility. Nevertheless, in its own way, it can reach indubitableness, that is, if it is affirmed in its very negations. It does not mean that the content of the act denying such an experience implies the affirmations, but that the very exercise of this act implies it. Experiences which in this way of are inevitable and undeniable, many may nonetheless be said to be apodictic to a certain extent, for they are present as soon as one is there. Experiencing and observing may be called primordial experience. Their apodicity is based only on one's experience of one's being and of whatever is given together with one's being as an experience. Is to deny such experience is not the same as to negate the unqualified something or being, but to negate the being of the negating. Hence, it is certain that everyone has this experience of something. This experience of something is an inescapable experience. On one many escape from a particular experience, but one can't escape from experiencing something. The most fundamental and radical questions one can raise is there anything at all? The answer can either be a negation or an affirmation. If it is a negation, it should be thus. There is nothing. Such an answer is itself contradictory, as the answer affirms negations, which is against something. Hence, absolute negation is impossible. For paradoxically, every absolute negation presupposes an absolute affirmation, upon which the negations rest. And an affirmative experience of something is not that which is not, but that which is being. Thus, experience of something or being is the ultimate starting point of metaphysics, manifest in other forms too. In other words, the experience of something constitutes the cognitive ground of the absolutely necessary, which presents itself as the foundations or the why of these facts, as the conditions of their possibility, their reality, and their hypothetical necessity. However, the fact which is experience is not in itself the ontological ground of the absolutely necessary, for the necessary is necessary even in the hypothesis. Only the insight that the necessary is independent of the fact. It is a metaphysical insight, for arrives at truths which are true of necessity, even if the world of experience would not exist or would be entirely different. Thus we may speak in a twofold way of the starting point of metaphysics. First of all, insofar as the pure pursuit of metaphysics is concerned, the starting point lies in the undeniable but necessary affirmations of something or being, of the experience real being that I am, and that of the other real beings. Begins with there are many with whom I find myself together. The necessity is only hypothetical, for it is for it is based on my own experience. It consists in the undeniability of whatever is implied in the act by that by which I experience that I am. Secondly, the starting point lies in the absolute essential necessity of something or being as being, which reveals itself to some extent but only imperfectly and inadequately in the reality of my being. This necessity consists in the undeniable absolute identity of being with beings, will being is in being is beings. This most undeniable fact of being with beings, will being is in beings, is the starting point of all other fundamental notions and principles.